Virginia Governor Ralph Northam defending his controversial abortion comments, saying his remarks were taken out of context when he was explaining his support of a third trimester abortion bill. This as multiple states now consider looser restrictions on late-term abortions, sparking conservative criticism. Politico suggesting the president could tap into that outrage during his State of the Union address. And he may. House GOP Conference Vice Chair Mark Walker also serves on the Homeland Security Committee. He's also a former pastor, which makes your perspective very unique, sir. If you could, we just heard from the governor. Northam said he's sorry that his words were mischaracterized by some, but he stands by them.
Yes, it's very frustrating. One of the things that bother me as well is almost the arrogance or the prideful spirit that he has with this. Never once have I heard him mention about the baby, the concerns about the third trimester. This really bothers us now that we've seen this in Virginia. We've seen it in New York. The hope in all this, though, is there is a new fervor or new passion, and maybe even you would call it, Sandra, a new awakening among the American people. 81% of Americans are against the taking of the life of a baby in the third trimester. Hopefully this is a wake-up call.
You know, to be clear, referencing your feelings about him and babies, he's a pediatric neurologist. And I think that's important to include that in the context of this conversation. He makes the case that third trimester abortions are rare and only performed in cases of severe abnormalities. And Congressman, I put that out there in the bigger picture of this conversation that we are having as a nation this week. And I'll share with you the words of Vice President Mike Pence, because he has penned a piece published in the National Review. Life is under attack. He writes, we must recommit ourselves today and every day to restoring the sanctity of life to the center of American law. How can that be done?
Well, I will tell you this, the first part of your question, I'm a pastor and a member of Congress, but I don't get to set the moral code of God's law. This is preposterous to think that New York just passed a law that is equivalent to what North Korea has. These laws don't exist in Latin or Central America. They don't exist in Europe. America, in some of these states, are leading the way at the most aggressive abortion laws in the country. This is preposterous that you have New York and North Korea mentioned in the same breath. Of course, at the same time, both their leaders don't allow for any kind of dissent when it comes to some of the things that Governor Cuomo has said. If you're pro-life, you're not even welcome in here. If you're not for abortion, those are preposterous statements coming from our own American people.
I want to throw up this map, Congressman, because it tells an interesting story about the company that we are in as far as countries that allow elective abortions in the third trimester, which is after the 20-week mark. We have them up on the screen. Included in that is North Korea. What do you tell people when we look at that and we sort of digest this news this week?
Well, I'm grateful that the great percentage of Americans understand that a baby, when it's viable, should have the opportunity and right to be able to live. The idea that this is only based in the terminology of women's health care, well, what about the baby? Who advocates for the baby? Who stands up for the baby's rights? So my wife is a family nurse practitioner. She's helped launch the sexual assault nurse examiner program at a large Trauma One center here in North Carolina. I understand that the health concern. I understand advocating for the women's rights and her concerns when she has health care issues. But America, hopefully, will turn back the clock on this and say this is an issue that we've got to stand. I'll add this last comment here. The House last cycle passed the 20-week ban abortion. There were only 6 Democrats who voted with us. I went back to my office and I wrote a thank you card to those 6 members for their courage to standing up. This is not America. We have to be more humane than this.
As far as the Virginia bill itself, Congressman, the Democrat co-sponsor of that late-term abortion bill, she's actually apologizing, and she's written a letter to her constituents saying she did not read the text of that bill when she signed it. She thought she was rolling back some Republican regulations that had been put in place back in 2012. She didn't know the additions that were made to that. She said, I vaguely remember signing it, and I did this in solidarity with my colleague and as a symbolic gesture for a woman's right to choose. She didn't read it. She said she will work harder and she will be better as a result of that.
Well, I wonder if that's completely accurate or if it's just the fact that they're getting ratioed on their Twitter accounts because of the fervor and the outcry. And this isn't just in the state legislature. It was Kamala Harris that said recently that she thought that anyone who was trying to push back against abortions after 20 weeks, she thought that was an immoral act. Seems to be a lot of immoral talk from some of our Democratic leaders. I believe that this is something that's going to turn the tide all the way back to Roe versus Wade as far as people taking a look at this, as far as how far, how aggressive, how progressive we become in some of our abortion laws.
And that was Dawn Adams of Richmond, by the way, that I was talking about there. Only a few seconds left. Would you like to see the president put this message out on this in his address to the nation next week?
Absolutely, for two reasons, Sandra. One, it's because it's the righteous, the moral thing to do. Two, it's also political. When you have 80% of Americans standing with you on a certain issue, it's common sense to do so. Not just from a political standpoint. It's the right thing to do. It's the political thing to do. But it's important that we get this message out to all American people.
Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina, we appreciate your time this morning.